Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. And today we're going to be continuing our discussion on the spectacular Spider-Man tie-in to Spider-Geddon as we take a look at Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 312. So, last time on Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. So, with the Inheritors having managed to make their way to the main Marvel Universe, Moreland wound up breaking off with the rest of his family to essentially, well, hunt the main universe Peter Parker because, well, he's got a vendetta against the guy and he wants to see his ass on a platter. As such, Moreland makes his way to New York and manages to find Spider-Man, and the two of them end up getting into a very brutal battle that takes them halfway across New York. And sadly, it's a very one-sided battle as Peter is getting his ass handed to him so much that well, it's just no contest. He's getting hurt. He's getting injured. His costume is getting ripped up. And it's taking everything Peter has just to stay in the game. But on top, which is already difficult to do because he's kind of running on no sleep. So it's essentially a losing battle. However, in the midst of this battle, Peter managed to call one of his allies, in this case J. Jonah Jameson, to go back to his apartment in order to get his web watch, with his intent to essentially just port right out of this world and alert the web warriors to what Moreland was doing. However, while Jonah was able to get the watch and meet it with Peter in Central Park, sadly Moreland managed to catch up with Peter before he got the chance to use it, and last issue ended with Moreland not only destroying the watch, but also breaking Peter's wrist, which is where this issue begins, as with Peter now exactly where Moreland wants him, he begins attempting to siphon out his life force. And Peter, well, he has no strength left to fight back, so unfortunately, he just kind of goes limp in his arms while Jonah just sits there watching in horror. And even what I kind of like is that Peter ends up having Peter has an opening narration in the comic talking about how he's fought Moreland 3 times, and every time he beat him, and that's actually a nice little mirror to Moreland's opening monologue from the last issue, because Moreland did have a similar thing, only whereas he was talking about how those 3 defeats are like a stain on everything that he is. For Peter, those were victories, and now he's wondering if he'll have another one under his belt. So he's just kind of wondering, so basically he's just thinking, I need a miracle right now. And thankfully, a miracle does arrive, because if you remember well, at the end of Spider-Geddon number 2, Miles wound up going to find Peter so that he could lead his side of the Spider Army, and thankfully, Miles has come in for that thing as he finds Peter in the middle of fighting Moreland, and so Miles engages in the fight, managing to get Moreland off of Peter, and essentially the two of them just duke it out right there in the park. And it's a pretty decent fight. Miles manages to get some good quips in as he and Moreland duke it out, though Moreland doesn't even consider Miles a challenge. He doesn't even take him seriously, calling him the lesser Spider, which actually does get under Miles' skin, but he does still put his best effort in there. He even manages to get a funny little thing, as at first he tries zapping Moreland with his Venom Blast, and Moreland just shrugs it off, so he manages to repurpose it by essentially pick-2ing him with the Venom Blast. It's hilarious. Of course, again, this isn't doing anything to really hurt Moreland, and really Moreland just finds this battle to be an annoyance, but Miles admits, yeah, that's kind of the point. He doesn't think they would actually beat Moreland. He just needed to keep him distracted enough for Peter to get away. Sorry, Ginny came in. Sorry about that, Ginny. As such, when Moreland realizes that's what Miles does, he looks back and sees that Peter and Jonah are now gone, which pisses Moreland off something fierce, because after all, he doesn't want to let Peter out of his sight for a second. As such, he attempts to go after them, but Miles winds up trying to stop him. All that really earns is Miles getting backhanded into a fence and causing him to get so groggy that he can't even stop Moreland from leaving again. But in the meantime, going back to Peter and Jonah, Jonah is doing his best to help Peter out, but again, it's not exactly doing well. At best, Peter just kind of tells Jonah gives Jonah the short version of what Moreland's deal is, that he's basically this vampiric monster who hunts spider people, and he hates Peter and wants him dead. And as such, Jonah does want to know exactly what he can do to help Peter help this guy, even suggesting that Peter just run away. But Peter admits that once Moreland's got a whiff of him, he's never gonna stop hunting him. So that's no point in running away. And in the case of Jonah helping him, well, Jonah's a regular civilian. At the if Jonah tried helping Peter against Moreland, he'd probably be even less useful than Peter is right now. And Peter's barely holding his own. So for Jonah, that would be less than a cakewalk, so to speak. As such, Peter further encourages Jonah to just kind of leave. Even through the conversation, he ends up making himself a web sling for his arm. But as Jonah continues insisting to help, Peter's spider sense triggers, and he ends up pushing Jonah away. And since they were on a little bridge over a river, he pushes Jonah into the river as Morlun appears and grabs Peter, jumping away to get them alone. Thankfully, Peter is able to get out of Morlun's grip by webbing his arm and pulling it back enough for Peter to fall out. And while Peter does get a few bumps and bruises from landing on the ground, he's thankfully away from Morlun. And in the midst of his tussle, he actually managed to land in the New York Zoo, so he at least gets some breathing room, so to speak. In the meantime, Miles, who's managed to recover, ends up catching up with Jonah, and Jonah lets Miles know that Peter was taken by Morlun, and again, Jonah wants to know if he can do some help, but Miles again reiterates he needs to get out of here. He needs to stay out of the way. At this point, he's an innocent bystander, and if he gets caught in this, he could get killed, so he just kind of needs to back off. Though Jonah is doesn't exactly want to just go away. In the meantime, though, back with Peter in the zoo, he's starting to contemplate if he's actually going to survive this one. After all, he's been in similar situations before, but even he admits that part of those things he felt was that some of those victories might have just been luck. And while the luck is a little twisted luck, since it's always near-death situations that he's always managed to come back from, only to find himself get punched in the head several times after, at the very least, it's a luck that he feels could run out, so he is genuinely worried that he might not survive. As such, he tries rattling his brain, trying to think of some way that he can beat Morlun this time. Like, there's gotta be some way he can overpower him and come out on top of this. And Peter ends up getting away, because after all, Peter actually thinks of a solution. After all, his fatigue is still kind of getting to him, and he's tired, and he can't help but think of sleep. And he even starts looking at the zoo animals, and he's like, yeah, I know, sleep is nice, but we can't really sleep right now. And that's when he gets it. He doesn't need to take Morlun down, but what if he put him to sleep? However, as Peter has this idea, Miles manages to catch up with Peter, and basically, Miles wants to help Peter take down Morlun, because after all, Peter's already beaten up like crazy, and he thinks, well, looks like you need all the help you can get. Hold on one second. Sorry about that, Shindy was doing stuff. But anyway, like I said, Miles does want to help Peter, but Peter essentially tells him, no, he's got to get out of here. He does have a plan in mind, but it's going to be kind of a lot harder if someone else is involved, which does almost mildly sound like an insult, but before Peter gets a chance to reword it, Morlun manages to appear, comes out of nowhere, because guess what? He could overhear the two arguing it out, and he's still very much intent on killing Peter, and at the very least Miles, because hey, he's a spider totem too, might as well take him out too. As such, Peter and Miles end up webbing up Morlun's legs and make a run for it because, well, they still need to hold him off before Peter can enact his plan. As such, they end up running to the cafe in the zoo, and they end up running into the kitchen of one of the restaurants, just turn on all the ovens, just break all of the lines, all the gas lines, and then Peter manages to essentially make a makeshift Molotov cocktail using a smoothie cup, and so as he and Miles go out in the back and Morlun comes in the front, Peter just chucks the flaming cup into the restaurant and causes the building to blow up, which, again, that's only just to hold Morlun off. That's not going to do a thing to him. As such, Peter and Miles end up going into one of the back rooms where they keep all the gear for taming the animals, and sure enough, he does manage to find the one with all the tranquilizers, with Miles putting together that Peter plans to use all these to just try and trank Morlun. As such, again, Miles tries offering his aid, but Peter once again tells him, no, I have to do this by myself. His logic behind this is that, well, Morlun is dead set on Peter. After all, Morlun came all the way to New York because he wanted Peter dead, and the reason he keeps hunting them is because Peter is after him. It's because he hates Peter that much. And sadly, if Peter wants to take Morlun down, then Morlun's focus needs to be entirely on him, and having someone else there will make things more complicated. So, as such, he does want Miles to essentially just go back to joining the main army, because after all, if Morlun is back, then odds are his family is as well, which Miles does confirm since, well, after all, he came here just to recruit Peter. But Peter tells him that as he is right now, he's in no position to lead. But He thinks that Miles can. After all, is still a bigger threat on the way. They have to still prioritize taking them down, and Peter just thinks that ultimately Miles would do a good job at that. And so, while Miles is still reluctant to leave, he does accept Peter's logic and decides, okay, decides to do my best. As such, Miles uses his functioning web watch to open a portal and head back to Loomworld. Though before he goes, Peter does give him one last bit of advice, telling him to take the Inheritors down, which is nice. And Miles tells him that he will before vanishing, leaving Peter alone in the room as Peter gets ready to take Morlun down. Unfortunately, though, before the comic ends, things end up getting a little bit more complicated. Because you see, J. Jonah Jameson is anything if not stubborn, and it turns out he used some of his old connections from when he was mayor of New York to essentially call a SWAT team and let them know Spider-Man is fighting that guy who was wrecking half of New York a little while ago, and he needs your help. And so the comic ends with a SWAT team outside of the zoo getting ready to charge in and help Spidey fight Morlun. So yeah, things are going to get more complicated. All right, so thoughts on this issue? Again, it's all right. It's fine. Again, like with last issue, this one is very much action oriented, which again kind of stems from the fact that the main plot for these tie-ins is that it's just literally Peter versus Morlun. We get some more diversity as we do get some more callbacks to what's going on in Spider-Geddon, with Miles coming in and offering Peter assistance, but again, the main focus is still Peter versus Morlun, and the whole comic still continues revolving around that as Peter is still doing his best just to stay in the fight and manage and find ways to outmaneuver and outthink Morlun. It's good stuff. It's still some legitimately good action. It's still some legitimately good stuff, and I like that we see Peter and I like the moment in the comic when Peter is just kind of wandering around the zoo contemplating, can I even beat him this time, before coming up with the idea of tranking him, which I think is a nice way of which kind of goes back to exemplify one of the compliments I gave to the previous Spider-Verse storyline, that because the Inheritors overpowered the Spider People so vastly, the only way to take them down was by outthinking them. And we see that with Peter here, as in this desperate situation, he's trying to use his brain to think of an alternate solution to beat Morlun, because in a fair fight, Morlun clearly outclasses him by miles. And so if Peter wants to beat him, he needs to think something creative. And I like how he comes to that conclusion. And ultimately, I do like the moment when Peter does give Miles his blessing to essentially just go lead the army, thinking that he can do it, he can take it down, and that Peter ultimately can't lead the army because he's been beaten to hell, and someone has to stop Morlun. So again, I dig that. I like that. That's legitimately good stuff, and I do like the plot developments we get from the comic. The problem for me, unfortunately, though, is that while I do like the action, and the story is and I do like that the story is simple enough for anyone to just pick up and read and get the gist of, sadly, because it is mostly action, it all tends to kind of blend into each other to a degree, which I don't like saying, but it's true. When I was rereading the comic, I realized that I started noticing some essential plot points that were hidden amongst the action that I realized I would need to remember when recapping the comic. Like when Peter was talking with Jonah and gave him the lowdown what was going on before he webbed up his arm. How Peter wound up getting to the zoo in the first place, or Miles going to meet with Jonah, or hell, even Peter coming up with the tranquilizer idea. All of those are essential plot points, but the problem lies in the fact that because there is so much action, it all starts to kind of bleed into each other. And that is sadly a problem. While it is good action, and I'm not going to knock on the story at all for how simple the story is, because I do like simple stories sometimes, and because the base of the story is literally just Spider-Man versus Morlun, it's easy to follow, and again, it does lead to some really creative stuff with Peter trying to outthink Morlun, despite the clear, this difference in their weight classes, so to speak. But because there is so much action, it's hard to keep track of what's important or what is actually important to the story. It all just kind of bleeds together after a while, and that is sadly a problem, because it really is just You want to know what the base, how everything goes with the story? Peter fights Moreland, gets his ass kicked, has to get away. Moreland catches up with them, they fight, Peter gets away, and it's rinse and repeat for that throughout the story. And that kind of starts getting and you kind of start losing track of what you should be paying attention to when the stuff that you are paying attention to is very samey and kind of dull when it keeps repeating over and over and over. Again, that doesn't mean the action is bad by any means. It's still some really good action, and it is still cool seeing Miles help Peter out. Like I said, Miles has some really good has some really funny quips when he goes up against Moreland. Like going back to how Moreland kept calling him Lesser Spider, Miles just goes, "Okay, that's just insulting. You don't see me going around calling you Lesser Chris Angel." I love that. That's funny. But again, because the action is also samey, it all just bleeds into each other, and as a result, the story tends to get this. As a result, it's hard to kind of pay attention a lot of the time, and as a result, the important stuff starts kind of getting lost in the sameness, so to speak, which I'm gonna call a problem for the storyline. So yeah, that is an issue. But otherwise, though, again, this portion of the story is fine on its own. It's still good. It's still got some good character stuff. The action is still really nice, even if it does kind of get a bit too much at points. I do love the stuff with Peter and Miles working together. I love the stuff with seeing Jonah trying to help and how he's kind of sort of shooting Peter's plan in the foot by the end of the comic. And overall, it's still a good time. It's still nice, and overall, I'm still enjoying myself. It's not it's still not amazing, but it's still enjoyable on its own. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you on Saturday as we look at the final part of the Spectacular Spider-Man tie-in. So till then, hope you have a good Thursday, and take care.